Well, it was mostly a thrill, and it was.
Recent footage of Mick Fleetwood shows hands that tremble uncontrollably and a voice that breaks mid-sentence. At 78, the drumming giant can barely hold his sticks steady. The man who powered Fleetwood Mac for 50 years is falling apart. Christine McVie's death in 2022 crushed him. The Maui fires took his livelihood. His body is failing from decades of abuse. But the saddest part isn't what we can see. It's what he whispered to a friend last month that nobody expected. The end is coming faster than anyone realized. Mick Fleetwood came into the world on June 24, 1947, in Redruth, Cornwall, at a time when England was still recovering from the war. Food and clothes were rationed, and most homes lived with less, and his family was no different. His father served in the Royal Air Force, and his pay was modest, so the house was simple and quiet, built around discipline and imagination rather than comfort. Mick was the second of 3 children, and even though life was tight, his parents made room for music. Jazz drifted in from the radio, while the routines of military life shaped the rhythm inside their home. Those early days, with ration books and careful spending, created a kind of resilience in him that stayed for life. It also gave him a work ethic that became the backbone of everything he later built in music. When he turned 4, the family moved to Wales because of another RAF posting. Suddenly, the world around him changed. Not just the towns or the scenery, but the sounds inside his bedroom. His father brought home African drumming records from Egypt, and Mick played them again and again. Those beats felt alive. At 6, he was tapping them out on pots and pans, and soon he was building little drum sets from boxes. Those early rhythms stuck with him and shaped the way he heard music. Long before Fleetwood Mac existed, those patterns from faraway places were already making a home in his head. Then, when Mick was 10, the family went even farther. They moved to Egypt, and Cairo greeted him with music that came from markets, clubs, and dusty streets. He heard Arabic drummers at festivals, and he heard big band jazz in small, smoky rooms, and he soaked up every sound like it was waiting for him. He watched street musicians play with a kind of freedom he had never seen, and tried to copy their patterns when he went home. By the time the family returned to London in 1957, Mick had a head full of rhythms that did not match the standard beats British kids were learning. He already felt different, and that difference soon became his strength. At 13, he convinced his parents to buy him his first real drum kit. It was small and squeezed into a cramped London flat, but it was his. He practiced every chance he got. Neighbors complained through the thin walls, but Mick kept going. His hands hurt, the rooms shook, and sometimes the noise filled the whole building, but he would not stop. His parents realized this was not a passing phase, and slowly began to support him. Those long hours changed him. They shaped the thick, steady groove he would later become famous for. As he hit his teenage years, he started slipping into Soho jazz clubs. Places like the Marquee and the Flamingo became his secret classrooms. He watched drummers who played with feeling instead of rules. Philly Joe Jones was one of his heroes, and Mick studied him quietly from the back of the room. In 1957, the Marquee was already hosting early versions of bands like the Rolling Stones and the Yardbirds, and Mick stood there absorbing everything. He learned that groove mattered more than perfection, and that instinct could be louder than technique. That idea would stay with him forever. Everything changed in 1963. Mick was 16 and decided school was slowing him down. He left and moved to London full-time. He tried auditioning for bands, but his height made him look awkward behind the kit, and his timing was rough. One group even rejected him for both reasons. He worked odd jobs like hotel porter shifts just so he could afford drum lessons. He lived with his older sister, practiced in her garage, and kept telling himself he could get better. Those months were difficult, but he refused to give up. In 1964, he finally joined his first semi-professional group, the Chesters. They played R&B covers in rough North London pubs, the kind of places where the floors stuck to your shoes and the pay barely covered dinner. At 6 feet 6 inches, he towered over everyone, which made his presence unforgettable. But his timing sometimes clashed with the guitarists, and arguments broke out right on stage. Some nights the tension grew so much that they nearly fought in front of the crowd. It was messy and loud, but it taught Mick how to handle pressure. It also showed him that music required teamwork, not just passion. In 1965, A fight during a gig pushed him too far, and he smashed his drum kit. It was a terrible moment, but it led to something better. His sister lent him money for a second-hand Ludwig set, a kit known for its huge bass drum and booming sound. With it, he began chasing gigs in clubs like Klux Klik, where young musicians fought for any chance to be heard. That new drum kit restored his confidence and caught the attention of players who were already respected. It felt like a fresh start. By 1966, he joined the Bow Street Riot for a short stint. They toured Scotland in an old van that broke down in the middle of nowhere, leaving them stranded without food or money. Mick slept inside cold venues, lived on scraps, and learned the hard truth about life on the road. Those weeks were rough, but they hardened him. Every setback made him more determined. Later that same year, he got a small spot in John Mayall's Blues Breakers, a band that trained some of the best musicians in Britain. He jammed with Peter Green in dusty basements, learning blues shuffles and the delicate balance between restraint and power. But Mayall found him too wild and dismissed him. The sting hurt, but the lessons stayed. In July 1967, a real turning point arrived. Mick and Peter Green left the Blues Breakers and formed Fleetwood Mac. Their first show was on August 13th at the Windsor Jazz and Blues Festival. Heavy rain nearly ruined their equipment, but they pushed through, and promoters recognized their grit. That night helped them secure a record deal. Within weeks, they convinced John McVie to join by offering equal songwriting credits, something rare for that time. The band's raw blues sound quickly caught attention. Bob Brunning had to step aside when McVie joined in September 1967, and soon the group released Black Magic Woman. By early 1968, it cracked the UK charts, proving they had real commercial potential. Their debut album in February 1968 reached number 4 on the UK albums chart and stayed there for 37 weeks. Mick's oversized bass drum became both a signature and a logistical nightmare, especially when they tried to squeeze it into small vans. Still, the sound it produced made the struggle worth it. Then came Albatross in November 1968. It was soft, dreamy, and unlike anything they had done. Mick used timpani mallets to create that floating cymbal feel. The song sold 60,000 copies each week and reached number 1 in January 1969. But success brought trouble. Royalty disputes with manager Clifford Davis opened Mick's eyes to how easily the music industry could betray its own artists. Even so, Albatross became their only UK #1 single and influenced groups like the Beatles. But the stage was not always calm. Jeremy Spencer, their slide guitarist, often brought chaos to live shows. He stripped, acted wildly, and once walked on stage with something stuffed in his trousers that nearly got them banned. Clubs refused to book them, including the famous Marquee Club. And during the 1969 Europe tour, drug use and personal tensions kept rising. Spencer disappeared backstage for hours, and the group struggled to keep things together. The mix of brilliance and instability became part of their early identity. Peter Green's mind began slipping in May 1970, and it happened fast. He had written Black Magic Woman and Oh Well, and people thought he was untouchable. Yet the heavy LSD use caught up with him during a stop in Munich. Something shifted inside him that night. He started saying that making music for money was wrong, and soon he wandered around in long robes with hair falling past his shoulders, talking about giving everything away. The band watched him change almost overnight. Their manager, Clifford Davis, said both Green and Danny Kirwan looked shaken in a way that felt deeper than exhaustion. Then came the concert in Munich. Green walked off and did not come back. A short while later, he checked into a mental health facility. Mick Fleetwood knew he had to make a hard call, and he fired his closest friend, even though it crushed him. The band moved on, but the loss opened a new chapter. Their blues foundation cracked, and the sound slowly shifted in a different direction. Mick carried the guilt for years. Danny Kirwan's fall came with just as much heartbreak. He joined in 1968 as a young guitarist who could help balance Peter Green's force, but by 1972, his drinking had taken over. Tension followed him everywhere. One night in Chicago, it all exploded. Backstage, he fought with Bob Welch about guitar tuning, refused to go on, smashed his guitar, and then tore into the band with harsh words. Mick Fleetwood had no choice. After the show began, Mick stepped out and fired him mid-tour. People in the crowd were stunned. It was rare to see a dismissal happen in real time. Kerwin disappeared from the spotlight after that and spent years drifting without a home. It marked another painful shift in Fleetwood Mac's story. Bob Weston entered the band in 1971 to replace Kerwin, but trouble met him too. During the 1973 Los Angeles tour, Mick Fleetwood discovered Weston was sleeping with his wife, Jenny Boyd. The humiliation hit him like a punch. Mick confronted him in anger and fired him immediately. The tour collapsed, with only 2 weeks finished and 26 more shows left undone. Weston had played on Penguin and Mystery to Me, yet it was the affair that defined his time. The band's instability deepened, but oddly, this chaos cleared the table for something new. The future pairing with Stevie Nicks and Lindsey Buckingham rested on these broken moments. Money problems brought on an even stranger chapter. In 1973, manager Clifford Davis decided the band should still tour, even though the real members needed a break. So he hired a fake Fleetwood Mac made from a group called Legs and sent them across the United States. Fans had no idea the people on stage were not the real band. When Mick and the others found out, they went into a legal war. Davis claimed he owned the name and even the recordings. The lawsuits drained their savings. They had to pawn gear just to keep recording. This mess finally pushed Mick to cut Davis loose and take control. Leadership slowly moved into Mick's hands because no one else could steady the ship. Christine McVie's presence became crucial when she joined full-time in 1970. Her calm voice and steady hand guided them through a rough period, but even she had breaking points. Her marriage to John McVie was crumbling due to his heavy drinking, and in 1972 she nearly walked away. She said she could not take it anymore. Mick Fleetwood stepped in and arranged quiet talks behind closed doors to keep her from leaving. Those talks kept the band from losing one of its most important pieces. Christine stayed, kept writing, and her songs carried warmth through the storm. By 1974, Mick Fleetwood pushed the band to move to Los Angeles. UK taxes were crushing them, and the fight with Davis made life almost unbearable. They signed with Reprise Records, hoping for a fresh start, but chaos followed them across the ocean. Mick slid deeper into cocaine, burning through money at an unbelievable pace. Some reports say he spent around $60 million on drugs through his peak years. Nights blurred in Hollywood clubs, while the band squeezed into a small house in Laurel Canyon. They tried recording Heroes Are Hard to Find, and sessions often spiraled as deals were made in the middle of the night, with Mick still high. Bob Welch felt the weight and finally quit in November 1974. With Welch gone, the band had no guitarist and no male singer. Everything felt broken, but this crack was where new light would enter. On New Year's Eve 1974, Mick heard a demo in a Sausalito studio. Producer Keith Olsen played a track from Buckingham Nicks, and Mick felt something spark. Lindsey Buckingham's guitar work and Stevie Nicks's voice struck him immediately. He invited them in. The others hesitated, but Mick pushed until everyone agreed. Buckingham insisted that Stevie join too. It was all or nothing. By the end of December, the duo had officially joined. It became the most important choice Mick ever made. It carried Fleetwood Mac straight into a new era. Work on Rhiannon began in 1975, and everything about it felt charged. Mick reached back into his childhood memories from Ghana, where his father had served in the British Army. He used those rhythms to shape the drums. Stevie Nicks brought lyrics about a Welsh witch, and she floated through the studio in that dreamy way of hers. Lindsey Buckingham pushed for tight structure, which clashed with Stevie's freer style. Arguments went on through the night. More than once, Stevie said she was done. To calm everyone down, Mick set up drum circles in his backyard. The group would gather, hit rhythms, and let the tension melt away. Those little gatherings shaped the hypnotic heartbeat of the song. Over My Head came out during this same period and reached number 20 on the Billboard Hot 100 in 1976. It felt like a major step forward, but behind that success, Mick Fleetwood's finances were falling apart. Old UK tax debts resurfaced. He sold personal items, even his vintage drums, just to pay for tour buses and bills. He later admitted he had bankrupted himself more times than he could count. His genius on stage did not protect him from the traps of fame. The band launched a massive US tour between 1975 and 1976. 150 shows in a blur of travel and exhaustion. Mick pushed himself harder than his body could take. In Dallas, during a show in 1976, his lung collapsed. Doctors told him to stop, but he went back on stage shirtless anyway. Fans watched him play through the pain, and his raw look made the moment unforgettable. It showed how far he would go to keep the band alive. During the Rumours sessions in 1976, the emotional center of the band cracked again. Mick Fleetwood, still married to Jenny Boyd, began a secret affair with Stevie Nicks. Their connection started on the Australian tour after a night of heavy partying. They hid it because they knew it could destroy everything. Stevie later said she fell in love with Mick, and the feelings bled into her songs. Missed drum takes, whispered arguments in hallways, and long nights complicated the album process. When Stevie found out Mick had started seeing her best friend Sarah, the hurt cut deep and added new tension to the already fragile sessions. John and Christine McVie were also falling apart. Their 8-year marriage broke down while they were recording Rumours. At work, they only spoke about music. Christine began seeing the band's lighting director, and John drowned his feelings in alcohol. Mick tried to mediate again, moving between rooms to keep them focused. The emotional damage affected every corner of the studio. Christine said she knew she could not make John happy anymore. Meanwhile, Mick's own marriage collapsed after Jenny left him for Bob Weston, a wound he carried silently. Pain layered over pain, yet they kept creating music. Drugs ran through every day of the Rumours era. Reports say the band spent around $180,000 on cocaine. During the sessions, they lined up on studio consoles, treating the ritual like a strange bonding routine. Mick often arrived so high that producer Ken Kylat had to kick him out. Stevie Nicks later received a warning from her doctor that continuing at this pace could be fatal. The chaos somehow fueled the music, giving Rumours its raw power, but it came at a heavy cost. When Go Your Own Way came out in January 1977, people could hear the rage in Lindsey Buckingham's voice. The music video shoot made the tension explode. Buckingham sang the line, "Packing up, shacking up is all you want to do," and Stevie snapped. She shoved him. Furious at what she said were false accusations. Mick had to step in and pull them apart to save the shoot. That moment lived inside the video's energy and showed the world just how close the band stood to breaking. Rumours sold more than 40 million copies by 1977. Mick Fleetwood became a millionaire almost overnight. He bought a huge house in Hawaii and enjoyed the success for a short while, until the IRS arrived. Old UK tax problems caught up with him, and suddenly he had to sell assets fast. Worse came when his accountant disappeared after using $500,000 of Mick's earnings to buy a yacht Mick never even saw. The accountant escaped to the Bahamas with millions more. By 1982, Mick was facing the truth of how fame, drugs, and blind trust had drained his fortune. Mick Fleetwood remembered 1977 as the year everything exploded around him. The Rumours tour was bringing in nearly $25 million, and the band was shining brighter than ever. But his own life was slipping into a place he had never wanted to visit. During the East Coast stretch of the tour, he let himself try heroin, something he had always kept away from. The trouble came fast. One night in Boston, just before a show, he overdosed in his hotel room. He passed out. His breathing stopped. Roadies found him sprawled on the floor and had to perform CPR, while minutes kept ticking toward showtime. They dragged him back from the edge, and no one in the crowd ever knew. He told the band nothing. He said later he was terrified that the truth would shatter whatever fragile piece the group still had. That moment became the first mark of a long addiction that would swallow money and nearly swallow him. He kept moving anyway. When Warner Brothers hesitated to pay for the strange new album he and the band wanted to make, he reached into his own pocket. He took $800,000 of personal money and pushed it into Tusk, a record built on restless drumming and a wild creative spark. But when the album came out, it sold only 4 million copies, far below the dream they had set after Rumours. Suddenly, he was responsible for a $300,000 loss. The people around him were stunned. He still said it was his favorite album because he felt free while making it, even though that freedom pushed him closer to bankruptcy. The storms kept rolling. While Stevie Nicks worked on her Belladonna album in 1981, she and Mick kept clashing during Mirage sessions. She arrived late. She vanished. Sometimes she took took so much cocaine she blacked out in the studio. Doctors warned her that her body could fail at any moment, even risk a brain bleed. Everything grew tense. The band paused. Mick fled to Ireland to save himself from the spiral that was forming around him. Later, he said that it might have been the lowest part of the band's story. And then came Tango in the Night. It was 1987, and Lindsey Buckingham was ready to walk away after too many fights, especially with Stevie. Mick heard the news and flew straight to Lindsey's home in Aspen. They spent 3 days talking and jamming, trying to glue something back together. He got Lindsey to stay, but the cost was heavy. Stress grew. Lindsey's health suffered. When the album finished, Lindsey finally left anyway. The world outside the studio was not kinder. In 1982, during the Mirage Tour, the band's bus crashed in Ohio. Mick smashed his wrist, and doctors told him to stay off the drums, but he refused. That night in Cleveland, he played with one hand. The crowd never forgot it. Bootlegs traveled from fan to fan. It sounded rough and raw and brave, almost like the band was fighting for its own heartbeat. Around that same time, Mick was trying to create something new for himself. In 1981, he flew to Accra, Ghana, dragging nearly 10 tons of equipment to record The Visitor. He lived in a shared hotel room, ate local food, jammed with Ghanaian groups, and pulled in musicians like Peter Green and George Harrison. His credit card got cut off. RCA barely promoted the record when it was done. It reached number 43 on the Billboard chart and sold about 150,000 copies in the United States. Critics loved the sound. The money problems only grew worse. He still called it a love letter to African music. Then came Behind the Mask in 1990, a record that marked another breaking point. Lindsey had quit by then, and new faces filled the empty space. Mick pushed for experimental synth drums, but fans hated the sound. The album sold only about 500,000 copies, a huge drop from the band's earlier glory. Mick had to mortgage his Los Angeles home to cover the losses. It cut deep. The tour became the last for that version of the band because, soon after, Stevie Nicks left and Christine McVie stepped away for a time, but the world kept pulling them back together. On January 19, 1993, the classic lineup reunited for Bill Clinton's inauguration gala. They performed Don't Stop for a crowd that brought in more than $1 million in revenue. Stars like Elton John, Michael Jackson, and Barbra Streisand watched them play. Stevie was still recovering from throat surgery, and Mick kept pushing through intense rehearsals. Old emotions stirred. Old rumors returned. Yet for a moment, the band felt whole. A decade later, in 2003, Lindsey Buckingham returned for Say You Will. Mick's drum solos became a highlight of the tour. Fans stood on their feet every night. The tour earned nearly $69.2 million that year, making it one of the biggest tours in the country. Still, the pressure never left. In 2004, backstage in Atlanta, a fight erupted between Mick and Lindsey. Voices rose, then fists. The cracks behind the music showed themselves again, but the tour kept going because that was what Fleetwood Mac always did. Mick had already lived through enough chaos to fill shelves of books, but in 1990, he tried writing just one. His autobiography sold 100,000 copies, and shocked nearly everyone. The newspapers printed it, piece by piece. He told stories about Peter Green's breakdown, about voices that haunted him, and about rumors of a dark pact Green had made long ago. Some fans were stunned. The band felt exposed. The book still became a must-read. The later years brought more pain. In June 2014, during the On With The Show tour, Mick fell on stage in Dublin while wearing platform heels. He wrecked his knee. He needed painkillers again. The tour had already earned more than $217 million around the world, but the injury forced shorter sets and revived fears about old habits returning. He admitted later that he struggled not to slip back into the shadows that once held him. By 2017, he tried reconnecting creatively with Lindsey Buckingham, recording parts of Lindsey's solo work in Nashville, but the peace did not last. In 2018, Mick and Stevie Nicks decided to remove Lindsey from the band weeks before a world tour. Lindsey sued for lost tour income, claiming he was owed as much as $14 million. The suit exposed old wounds and revealed how little of their agreements had ever been written down. It felt like another chapter in a story filled with bruises. Then came August 2023. Wildfires swept through Maui, and destroyed Mick's restaurant, Fleetwood's, on Front Street. At least 53 people died. Thousands lost their homes. Mick lost a business he had loved since 2012, along with more than $2 million in uninsured damage. He said the pain came from more than money. Maui was home, his staff was family. He chose to help the community rebuild, rather than look back at what he had lost. The next years felt heavy. Christine McVie died in November 2022 after a stroke. Mick called her his soulmate. The fire in Maui destroyed photos of their long friendship, making the grief even sharper. Now, as he reached 78, he often spoke about loneliness and the hope that Stevie and Lindsay would reconcile someday because he believed it would honor Christine's memory, even through the sorrow he kept creating. In March 2025, he joined Lindsay again in Los Angeles to record tracks for Miley Cyrus. They worked inside the $1 Million Theater, building a song called Secrets. Miley said it felt like a gift meant for healing. The track blended Mick's seasoned drumming with Lindsay's unmistakable guitar work. People began whispering about a possible revival of Fleetwood Mac, even though Stevie remained unsure. And in April 2025, he stood on stage in Cleveland to induct Bad Company into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. His hands trembled, his voice broke. Years of drumming and an old lung collapse had left marks he could not hide. Still, he spoke with pride and love. He kept cheering on younger artists. He kept pushing himself forward. Even as his body slowed, the fire inside him stayed warm.